One of the least known stories in the history of Western Christianity is that of Muslim Spain, seen here in a map of Spain in 1037, the extent of which reaching up to the very north of the peninsula, with Leon and Castile, the Christian lands of Navarre, Aragon and Barcelona, with the major part of the Iberian Peninsula dominated by Muslim rule. It was a time of extraordinary creativity, as we will come to talk about. But we see here but one example from the 13th century, a beautiful illuminated manuscript, one of the very few from Muslim Spain. The Muslim expansion continued throughout the 6th and into the 7th century. In 711, the Berber Tariq invaded and rapidly conquered the Visigoth kingdom, subduing Spain. And famously, by 733, the Muslims had reached Poitiers in France. There was a battle more significant for the Christians than the Muslims, which halted that Muslim advance. And it was a truth that at that stage, Muslim military expansion had come to an end. Tariq gave his name Jabal, Mount of Tariq, to what we know as Gibraltar. And in 712, Tariq's lord, Musa ibn Musa, joined the attack, and within 7 years, we saw the conquest of the peninsula. It became one of the centers of Muslim civilization, and the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba reached its peak of glory in the 10th century, and Spain was called Al-Andalus by Muslims and remained at least partially under Muslim control till 1492, when Granada was conquered by Ferdinand and Isabella. But back to the beginning, a 9th century chronicle of the conquest of Spain tells of the fall of Cordoba to the Muslim invaders. It is the death of Roderick, the Visigoth king. Let us hear the words from the chronicle. When Tariq landed, soldiers from Cordoba came to meet him, and seeing the small number of his companions, they despised him on that account. Then they fought. The battle with Tariq was severe. They were routed, and he did not cease from the slaughter of them till they reached the town of Cordoba. When Roderick heard of this, he came to their rescue from Toledo, but then fought in the place of the name of Shadurian in a valley which is called to this day the Valley of Hakim. They fought a severe battle, but God, mighty and great, killed Roderick and his companions. Spain saw the greatest and lengthiest engagement between Christians, Muslims, and Jews over an extended period of time. The Arab conquest of 711 had been one of the last great Muslim victory. And as one historian has put it, it had brought under their control a site ideally suited to the culture that they imported. The dry lands of Spain were cultivated by the Arabs and Berbers who had long experienced a long history with lands with little water. And they were able to develop crops through good use of wells and irrigation. The Arabs made the Spanish lands fertile as never before, and the coastal and urban areas became centers of trade with the Mediterranean. The Arabs in Spain entered into extensive networks across the Mediterranean world. And this included also into the sub-Saharan West African regions. All was built on the influx of capital and of cheap labor. Muslim Spain, as I say, was called Al-Andalus, land of the Vandals, which they were referring to the previous occupants. At the height of Andalusian power was reached in the 10th century under Abd al-Rahman. Cordoba rivaled Constantinople and Baghdad. Under the ruling Muslims were the Christians and the Jews. Many of the Christians were Hispano-Roman, while former Visigoths, while the Jews were professionals, merchants, physicians, scribes, and financiers. Jews and Christians were allowed to live under what was known as the demes, or protected community. And while there was limited toleration in the modern sense, Jews and Christians suffered little persecution, although it has to be added there were at times pogroms. The Muslims rulers sought to overcome both Christianity and Judaism, but not through violence, but largely through attrition, by allowing them to wither. The other religions were not allowed to proselytize, and the hope was that they would eventually turn to Islam. In the 9th and 10th centuries, both Christians and Jews at some level did convert to Islam, but many chose to leave and to go to the northern lands, which had remained Christian. During the 10th century, there's considerable evidence of violence and disorder amongst the rulers of Al-Andalus. And what had been a largely unified area began to break into small ruling territories. Many thought that the decision to allow Christians and Jews to remain had undermined the caliphate, and relations between Jews and Christians grew more troubled in the 10th century. It was at this point that the Christian rulers of the north began the long reconquest that would last almost 500 years. Toledo was captured in 1085, and as historians have pointed out, relations between the three religions at the local level did remain somewhat cordial, though at times contradictory and confusing. An example of these continued relations are seen here in this extraordinary image from the Barcelona Haggadah, which has a representation here of the Seder meal. In our discussion of Spain in the Middle Ages and of relations between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, we will see that it was a time of rich interaction, but also of violence and conflict. It was a time when extraordinary ideas were transmitted, great art produced, and one of the most remarkable cultures of medieval world.